He sat alone in a sterile white room, heart racing, palms sweaty. In his hand, the device pulsed softly, like it was alive. A simple screen blinked once, then displayed a single number, 14,622. He dropped it, not out of shock, but out of knowing. He'd had this exact moment before, 14,622 times. The gasp, the trembling, the disbelief. Even now, he knew he was about to pick it up again, and he did. Across the world, billions faced the same revelation. They were not living life for the first time. They were reliving it on an endless loop. Every laugh, every heartbreak, every decision and regret already written, already played forever. And now humanity had proof. What happens when the illusion of choice is shattered? When fate is no longer abstract, but measurable? When a tiny screen tells you this isn't your life, it's just your next rerun. Welcome to the age of eternal recurrence. In this alternate future, scientists make a horrifying discovery. Not just a theory, but empirical truth backed by unassailable evidence. Every human life is trapped in an infinite loop. Each person lives their exact same life again and again, down to the smallest details. No deviation, no branching paths, no freedom. The breakthrough comes from a revolutionary invention known only as the recurrence counter. At first, it's dismissed as a hoax. But further testing proves its accuracy beyond any doubt. The device is placed near your skin, and after a short scan, it reveals a number. How many full times you've already lived and died this exact life. Some are shocked to see 2 or 5. Others collapse upon learning. They've lived over 90,000 times. Religions scramble to adapt. Scientists panic. Philosophers, for the first time in centuries, fall silent. Suddenly, the very pillars of human thought, free will, morality, ambition, start to crack. Because if everything has already happened exactly this way before, then what's the point? To understand how we got here, we must start at the moment of revelation. When the recurrence counter first emerged and the world began to fracture under the weight of truth, it began not in a cathedral or at a scientific symposium, but in a small, underfunded temporal physics lab buried beneath a university campus in Geneva. The project's original purpose was laughably modest: to test for irregularities in chronon particle fluctuations, essentially the ticks of time itself. But what the team found wasn't a glitch in time's flow. It was a loop. A perfect, infinite loop. At first, the data looked like noise. Anomalous spikes, recurring energy signatures, inexplicable quantum echoes. But then came the pattern. A repetitive resonance within human biofields, as if the universe itself was recording and replaying identical human timelines to verify their findings. The team developed a prototype device capable of scanning a person's loop signature, a unique temporal imprint apparently etched into the very fabric of spacetime. It would take only 3 seconds for the device to calibrate and return a number. How many iterations of your life had already occurred? They called it the recurrence counter. The first test subject was a doctoral student named Elias Romer. He volunteered with a laugh, expecting nothing. But when the screen flashed 37, the laughter died. They ran the test again and again. Same number, unchanging. Still skeptical? The team performed blind tests on hundreds of volunteers. Cross-referenced results with age, gender, and health. It didn't matter. Each person had a fixed count, as if a cosmic odometer tracked every trip they took through their own life. News of the device leaked before the team could even write a proper paper, and within days, the world turned upside down. Denial, then panic. Religious institutions were the first to denounce the device as blasphemy, some even claiming it was demonic. Governments banned it in several countries, but the ban was useless. Within weeks, black market versions flooded the internet. The recurrence counter became a symbol, a cult object, a weapon. Some people refused to look, terrified of what they might learn. Others became obsessed, desperate to know if they were new souls or ancient ones, caught in tens of thousands of cycles. Those who scored high counts often broke down. "Why didn't I ever change?" they would scream. "Why didn't I live differently, even once?" Because they couldn't. That was the terrifying conclusion. Each life was a fixed playback, every moment locked into place. You couldn't escape it because you had already tried countless times. Scientific consensus. Soon, other labs worldwide replicated the results. Attempts to falsify the data failed. Quantum physicists, neurologists, even theologians came together to grapple with the revelation. And one conclusion rose above all. The universe, at least for human consciousness, behaves like a closed loop. No branching timelines, no multiverse, just one track, played forever. Humanity wasn't progressing toward a future. It was on repeat. But the truth about the loop was only the beginning. Once the world accepted it, another question began to haunt every mind. If we can't change our choices, are we still responsible for them? The concept of free will had always been a cornerstone of human identity. Entire civilizations, laws, religions, and personal philosophies were built around the idea that we have choices, that our lives are the sum of those choices. But now, that illusion had crumbled. After the widespread rollout of the recurrence counter, the psychological effects were immediate and catastrophic. The collapse begins. In the first month alone, exit rates spiked globally. Mental health hotlines were overwhelmed. Hospitals flooded with patients suffering from identity crises, derealization, and what came to be known as loop trauma syndrome, a condition marked by existential disassociation and uncontrollable despair. People who once believed in destiny now stared into a terrifying paradox. Everything mattered, but nothing could be changed. A woman who learned she had lived her life 21,004 times said on live broadcast, "I stayed with my abusive husband in every single loop. Every one. That means I was never strong enough to leave him. Not once in 21,000 tries." This realization sent tremors through the collective human psyche. Strength, courage, kindness, regret, they all lost meaning when revealed as unchangeable behaviors. You weren't brave. You were programmed to be brave, or weak, or cruel, or loving. And you always would be. Reactions divide. Reactions bifurcated. One side fell into nihilism, believing that if nothing could change, nothing mattered. This led to what was dubbed the silent era, where tens of millions globally withdrew from life, resigning from jobs, cutting off relationships, even refusing to speak. Why bother? The other side embraced deterministic peace. If I can't change it, they reasoned, then I must accept it. These people found comfort in the idea that all mistakes were preordained. That suffering had always been part of the loop, and resisting it was pointless. A smaller radical group called the Loop Breakers emerged, convinced that awareness itself could crack the cycle. They attempted random, bizarre actions: eating sand, quitting jobs on impulse, hurting themselves. Anything they thought might introduce chaos into the script. None of it worked. The rise of mirror behavior. In social settings, people began calling out others' predictable actions. A viral meme swept through major cities. You were always going to say that. It was funny at first, then unsettling, then unbearable. People second-guessed every word, every thought. Were they real or just reruns? The dating world collapsed. Romantic relationships suffered profoundly. After all, what's the point of love if it's simply a pre-recorded scene? Worse still, a chilling new behavior pattern emerged: loop testing. Individuals would stare blankly at friends or family during conversations, then repeat actions with eerie calmness just to see if things ever did feel different. They never did. Spirituality shattered and rebuilt. Religious institutions crumbled or mutated. Major monotheistic religions splintered, with some sects claiming the loop was hell, eternal punishment with no escape. Others argued it was divine design, proof of a grand architect who programmed the perfect story. New religions emerged. The path of the circle taught followers to treat every action as sacred, even if predetermined, because repetition was the divine dance. Meanwhile, the voidists declared that existence was a prison, and the only salvation was non-existence, worshipping nothingness as the true goal. Therapists became the new clergy. The phrase, "It's not your fault. It was always going to happen that way," became the mantra of an entire generation. Art and media implode. Creative industries spiraled. Writers questioned why they should write. Filmmakers asked if they were just echoing what they had already created 1,000 times before. Some artists destroyed their own work in a desperate attempt to break pattern. Ironically, one of the only booming industries became loop art, deliberately repetitive installations and songs that forced viewers to confront their own loops. But even as minds fractured, another crisis loomed. If you can't control your fate, does morality still apply? Is anyone truly guilty or innocent if all decisions were locked in from the start? When humanity lost its grip on free will, morality didn't just blur, it fractured. For centuries, people believed right and wrong hinged on choice. But what happens when no one can truly choose? When every decision, every betrayal, every act of heroism or cruelty is simply a scene from an unchangeable script? The answer? Society redefined what it meant to be good, evil, and everything in between. The collapse of traditional ethics. Legal systems fell into chaos. Defense lawyers argued that criminals couldn't be held accountable. They had no control over their actions, so punishment was unjust. Surprisingly, many judges agreed. Juries deadlocked. Trials stalled. Some high-profile convicts were released with a disturbing message from the courts. You were always going to do it. You were always going to be caught. It is not justice. It is inevitability. Some nations abolished prisons altogether, not from mercy, but from futility. Others doubled down, enforcing punishment not to correct behavior, but to preserve the illusion of moral consequence. Religious leaders debated whether sin could exist without intent. Can you be damned for what you were destined to do? Some said yes, arguing that suffering was woven into the loop for divine reasons. Others insisted no punishment should exist for acts beyond human control. Morality splintered into three major schools of thought. Loop ethics. This school argued that morality must persist even without choice. Goodness, they claimed, is measured not by freedom, but by consistency. If a person always sacrifices themselves to save others, even without knowing it, that act remains noble. Not because they chose it, but because it is who they are, inherently. Loop ethicists became modern saints, celebrating those whose loops contained lives of compassion, service, or artistic brilliance. They held ceremonies for individuals with high counts who had consistently lived honorable lives, treating them like spiritual masters. Moral egoism. This emerging philosophy proposed a middle path. Morality exists only in how others respond. You may have no choice in committing harm, but others do have the choice to forgive or condemn. The morality, then, lies in the echo, the ripple of action and reaction across lives. This led to new rituals, echo trials, where people reenacted key events from their looped lives with others. Not to judge what had happened, but to reframe it emotionally. The goal wasn't justice. It was healing. Existential liberation. The most radical group believed morality was dead. They embraced the loop's determinism with nihilistic glee. There is no right, no wrong, they proclaimed. Only reruns. Members lived recklessly, indulging every impulse without guilt. This gave rise to dangerous subcultures, loop cults, violence, tourism, and purge zones, Lawless areas where morality was officially abandoned under the rationale that you would have done it anyway. The individual struggle. On a personal level, the effect was even more devastating. People looked back on moments they had once felt proud of, like overcoming addiction, saving a life, or standing up to abuse, and saw not courage, but certainty. They had never really chosen. They were always going to win, or fail, or survive, or die. Therapists tried to adapt. Some urged patients to adopt loop mindfulness, the idea that even in a fixed script, awareness gave life beauty. You couldn't choose the scene, but you could feel it fully. Others offered what became known as the ritual of forgiveness, looking in the mirror and saying aloud, "I forgive you for what you couldn't change. I celebrate you for what you always did right." For many, it became a daily practice. New definitions of purpose. With morality in flux, people asked, what is the point of life in a loop? Some found purpose in observance, becoming recorders of the loop, writing and reflecting without trying to change anything. Others pursued perfection, believing that doing one's best in every moment, no matter how predetermined, gave life its meaning. But the most widespread answer came from a simple, haunting phrase passed around online. If you must walk this road forever, you might as well enjoy the view. Yet even as people tried to rebuild their ethical compass, a new division began to take root. Not based on religion, race, or wealth, but something even more personal. How many times you had lived before? At first, the recurrence counter was treated as a curiosity, a terrifying novelty. But as the data poured in and billions of people discovered their loop number, a new metric of human value emerged. It wasn't wealth, it wasn't intelligence, it wasn't fame. It was loop count. How many times have you lived this life? That single number, once private and deeply personal, began to dictate everything. The birth of the loop class system. Very quickly, society fractured along numerical lines. People with low counts, first lifers, or newborns were seen as inexperienced, spiritually undeveloped, or even primitive. Meanwhile, those with thousands or even tens of thousands of loops became revered, feared, or envied. A man with a count of 46,872 couldn't walk down the street without being stopped. "What is it like?" strangers would whisper. "Do you remember anything? Do you feel wiser? Do you see patterns?" Corporations began hiring based on count. Those with high numbers were labeled old souls and prized for leadership roles, as if repetition alone granted insight. Some companies even marketed products as loop-optimized, claiming they were designed by people who had lived long enough to know better. Education systems shifted. In some countries, loop count became part of a student's file. Teachers were instructed to adapt expectations based on apparent loop experience. In practice, this meant lower count students were underestimated and higher count ones pressured to perform. The dating world created new filters. Seeking partner with minimum 5,000 loops. No loop virgins. I only date first lifers. Everything feels fresh with them. Loopism, the term coined to describe discrimination based on life count, became rampant. Religious and political realignments. Religions underwent yet another seismic shift. Some embraced the idea of reincarnation made literal. Temples and churches began segregating worship by loop count. Some sects taught that high loop individuals were approaching transcendence, that enough lives might unlock freedom from the loop altogether. Political systems restructured. Loop count registries became mandatory in many nations. Some democratic governments introduced loop-weighted voting, where your vote carried more influence the more loops you had completed, based on the assumption you were more experienced. Authoritarian regimes took the opposite approach. Loop equality laws banning any public discussion of loop count to prevent unrest. Ironically, the more they tried to suppress it, the more it fueled black market recurrence counters and underground loop supremacist groups. The rise of loop wisdom industries. A massive new industry emerged. Loop wisdom monetization. Gurus, influencers, and so-called sages with counts over 10,000 offered expensive seminars, life coaching, and spiritual mentorship. They claimed they could guide you through the loop with grace. Some became celebrities overnight. But scandals erupted. Investigative journalists revealed that many high counters had simply hacked counterfeit devices. This launched a new technological arms race to validate authentic loop readings and penalize fraud with social exile. Still, true high counters existed, and some spoke rarely, if at all. When asked why, one simply replied, "What's the point? I've already answered every question, even this one." Low count shame and the loopless underground. Those with low counts suffered silently. Some were mocked or excluded from opportunities. Others became targets of a new prejudice: loop essentialism, the belief that low counters were less evolved, less reliable, and less meaningful. In response, many low counters went underground, refusing to disclose their number or modifying their devices to display false counts. Loop blindness became a political movement, advocating for complete detachment from loop status, arguing that awareness of the number only deepened the trap. One popular slogan was, "Live like it's your first. Die like it's your last." Still, society continued to stratify. Schools began grouping students by count ranges. Prisons separated inmates by loops to prevent conflict. Marriages broke down over mismatched numbers. New flags, social media badges, and digital communities emerged, dividing humanity into ever-narrowing categories of self. A new world measured by loops. In this brave new world, your loop count was your resume, your passport, your confession, your curse. It shaped how others saw you, and more chillingly, how you saw yourself. The idea of identity, already fragile in a world without free will, was now entangled in a cold, immutable number. And the more people looked at that number, the more they wondered, was there ever an end? Was there a loop that finally broke the cycle? Was someone out there on their final round? Driven by desperation and hope, a global movement emerged, not to adapt to the loop, but to fight it. A rebellion of the mind, of science, and of spirit. And at its heart, one question: can the loop be broken at all? As society settled into its loop-based hierarchy and morality fragmented under the weight of determinism, a defiant current surged beneath the surface. Resistance. Not just to the social systems, but to the very loop itself. Even in a world where every second was preordained, humanity's innate desire to escape the cage never truly faded. And so, a movement was born. Some called it madness. Others, the last hope for freedom. They called themselves the Divergents. The Divergent movement, fighting the unchangeable. At first, they were laughed off as idealists or performance artists, wearing mismatched shoes, speaking in gibberish, attempting to act against their known habits. But as their numbers grew, so did their methods and desperation. They believed that awareness of the loop could unlock a fracture point. A micro-choice buried so deep in the human mind that it might not be fixed, something untouched by the deterministic pattern. Their philosophy was simple. If the loop exists to preserve the known, then chaos is the only exit. They began attempting increasingly erratic acts, burning down childhood homes, confessing lifelong secrets while streaming, cutting off communication with loved ones at moments they had never dared to before. A few even willingly maimed themselves, believing it would alter their internal memory timeline enough to corrupt the replay. None of it worked, at least not in any measurable way. Every act, no matter how random or shocking, felt familiar, practiced, rehearsed. This led to the first great divergent collapse. Many gave up, joining the silent or succumbing to madness. But the core belief persisted, and it evolved. The fracture theorists and temporal hackers, a new generation of rebels, emerged, less theatrical, more scientific. They became known as fracture theorists. These minds believed the answer lay not in the body or the mind, but in time itself. If human lives repeated inexactitude, perhaps it was because the fabric of time was woven into a closed loop. They theorized that this structure could be bent, maybe even broken through technological or metaphysical interference. Global black market research labs formed. Some experiments were harmless. Electromagnetic pulses while asleep, dreaming under neural dampeners, or isolating individuals in sensory deprivation for years to see if the loop pattern broke in those conditions. Others turned dark. Rumors spread of people locked in sealed bunkers with constant stimuli, or children raised without language in an effort to confuse the timeline script. A few labs claimed success, test subjects exhibiting new behaviors, but none could be reliably replicated. Eventually, a rogue group of AI specialists attempted to build a sentient quantum AI capable of monitoring the loop across iterations. They claimed their AI, once powered, would be immune to the loop's effects, thereby acting as an external observer capable of identifying anomalies. It failed to boot. Or maybe it had already booted 14,872 times. The myth of the final count. Then came whispers. Ancient, viral, unverifiable. Stories circulated online and in hushed gatherings about a person, sometimes described as a child, other times a blind old man who had reached the final loop. Their recurrence counter, when scanned, allegedly displayed a number followed by a blinking infinity symbol, then powered off. Some said this was proof the loop could be escaped, that the universe was watching, waiting for someone to walk the same path enough times to earn release. Others said it was a trap, a psychological defense mechanism, the mind creating a fairy tale to avoid despair. Still, the story spread like wildfire. The movement changed. Hope returned. The Ascendants, a new faction within the Divergence, formed. They didn't try to break the loop through chaos. They sought to master it. Perfect every moment. Refine every relationship. Live each loop with such grace and dignity that they might, eventually, be judged worthy of ascension. And so, two opposing rebellion paths emerged. The Breakers destroyed the loop through disruption and defiance. The Ascendants escaped the loop through spiritual and behavioral perfection. Ironically, both paths became identical in outcome, as each action had already been taken, already been recorded, already been looped. But that didn't stop them. Loop rebellion as art, movement, and madness. Across the world, loop resistance wove itself into every culture. Films were created that depicted actors deliberately improvising scenes, even though they claimed to know the exact lines from memory. Musicians performed without rehearsing. Writers stopped editing altogether, releasing raw, chaotic works they insisted were loop-resistant. Performance art turned violent. A man in Tokyo stood in the same square for 12 hours a day repeating, "Not this time, not this time, not this time," until he collapsed. He became a martyr. His death was labeled Loop Denial, episode number 7136. But still, nothing changed. The universal realization. Over time, even the rebels began to ask, if our rebellions were scripted, are we still rebels? A haunting phrase began to echo across underground forums and anti-loop literature. The loop doesn't fear your fight. It requires it. And for the first time in history, rebellion was not about change. It was about affirmation. A declaration that even in total determinism, the desire to resist was human nature itself. Yet, as resistance reached its emotional and philosophical peak, a new kind of figure emerged. Not fighting, not submitting, but simply refusing to know. A silent wave of people who turned away from the recurrence counter altogether. The world called them cowards, but others called them free. Amid the chaos of rebellion, obsession, and collapse, strange quiet began to spread, not from submission, but from deliberate rejection. A new movement, subtle at first, began to rise. Its members didn't scream. They didn't protest. They didn't even scan their recurrence counters. They simply chose not to know. They were called the silent, the birth of voluntary ignorance. The silent were not organized, nor did they ever declare themselves as a movement. They didn't meet, they didn't preach, they just disengaged. No social media posts, no loop forums, no debates. They unplugged, they opted out. At first, others mocked them. Delusional, afraid, weak. But in time, their silence became something else, a kind of power. People began to notice that the silence seemed calmer. Not happier, necessarily, but grounded. Focused while others spiraled in existential confusion, chasing theories and loop-breaking schemes. The silent tended gardens, played music, laughed with their children. They lived, not as if the loop didn't exist, but as if it didn't matter. Why they refused to know. To the silent knowledge of their count was a poison. It didn't free anyone. It chained them to comparison, to despair, to endless mental spirals. One anonymous note found pinned to the door of a collapsed recurrence research lab. Read, "I don't care how many times I've lived. I care about this time." That quote became sacred to many, even tattooed onto skin. Some scientists hypothesized that those who refuse to view their loop count might experience less neural degradation, fewer signs of existential fatigue, and greater creative capacity. They had no burden of numerical identity, no past lives to weigh them down. But to others, this was denial, a betrayal of reason. "If the truth exists," said one vocal anti-silent activist, "we must face it. Ignorance isn't freedom, it's surrender." The return to presentness. As more individuals joined the silent, publicly or in private, society began to shift again. New slogans emerged. Don't check the count. Live blind, live bold. This loop is enough. A surprising number of former rebels, both breakers and ascendants, began to vanish from their movements and resurface in rural towns, anonymous neighborhoods, or solo retreats. Some claimed they were failed rebels. Others said they'd realized the deepest rebellion of all was to stop trying. In an era obsessed with knowing, tracking and quantifying everything, not knowing became radical. The paradox of the silent. And yet, the paradox remained. If someone chose to live without knowing their loop count, wasn't that choice itself predetermined? Were the silent truly rebelling, or were they simply fulfilling another role in the eternal script? No one could say. In fact, some philosophers began to suggest that the loop required the silent, that the system would collapse if every individual fixated on their count. Like a clock with too many gears spinning too fast, it would burn itself out. The silent, then, were its balancers, its regulators, its reset button. If true, it meant they weren't rebels or cowards. They were necessary. The final revelation, the loop as a mirror. As years passed, one realization emerged across all factions, whether they counted, fought, or stayed silent. The loop was not a prison of bars, it was a mirror of behavior. A reflection so perfect that even knowing you were trapped changed nothing. The recurrence counter did not cause the loop, it merely revealed it. The real horror wasn't the number. It was realizing that you were always going to be exactly who you are. Cultural transformation. A global cultural shift followed. Governments stopped publishing loop count demographics. Education focused less on loop experience and more on emotional maturity. Religions merged, some preaching divine purpose within the loop, others teaching transcendence through presence. Art changed again. Instead of fighting the loop, creators began making works that honored the now. Ephemeral, unrecorded, deliberately fleeting. And in the center of it all, the silent remained still, unchanged, unconcerned. A journalist once begged a silent elder to speak, just once, about the meaning of life in the loop. She said nothing, but on the table, she slid over a small piece of paper. On it were 5 words. It mattered to me anyway. And so humanity adapted, not by breaking the loop, but by learning to live with it. But the question still lingers in the hearts of many. If you found out tomorrow that you'd lived this life 27,438 times, would you still choose to live it fully, just one more time? In a world where every breath, every choice, every heartbreak and triumph is locked into an infinite cycle, humanity was forced to confront the most uncomfortable truth imaginable. We are not the authors of our lives. We are the readers, turning the same pages over and over again. The recurrence counter didn't change reality, stripped away the illusion that we were ever in control. And in its wake, civilizations collapsed, ideologies mutated, rebellions erupted, and new philosophies bloomed from the wreckage. Some chose denial, others chose rebellion. A few embraced perfection, but the ones who endured were the ones who let go, who found meaning not in rewriting the script, but in performing it fully, with heart, with presence, and with peace. Because maybe, just maybe, the beauty of life was never about changing the ending. Maybe it was about feeling it all, every time. And if this loop goes on forever, then every moment we live is infinite. And so, it matters more, not less. If you knew you had lived this exact life thousands of times before, would you change how you live it now? Would you chase something different? Or would you finally allow yourself to be present, knowing that every joy and sorrow was always yours to carry? Let us know in the comments, would you want to see your loop count, or would you rather stay silent? And if this episode made you reflect, share it. Help someone else confront the loop they might already be trapped in. Subscribe for more deep what-if scenarios, and remember, you may have watched this before, but maybe this is the time it changes you.